Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to Smoke in the Woods. Today we're stepping a little farther forward in the 19th century, up to about 1850. And this is going to be a three-part video series. It's going to be spread out over the next couple of months, where we're going to be talking about 1851 navies. Now, if you know our other channel, 11 Bang Bang, you know that several years ago, 5 or 6, I did a huge in-depth video on the development of the 1851 Navy. Now, over the years, I have not revisited the subject very much because I spent so much time on it there, but the 1851 Navy is my all-time favorite cap and ball revolver. This particular revolver here is the same one I was shooting in that video back then, and I've had this one for a long time. As a matter of fact, over the years, I've sold it, and eventually I always wind up buying it back. I've done that 2 times in a row because this is just my cap and ball revolver. The one that I've probably fired the second most out of any cap and ball revolver I've ever owned. My old brass frame 51 Navy actually comes in first with well over 2,000 rounds put through it. But this one's starting to catch up now that caps are back in stock especially. Now let's take a look at this. This is the Pietta 1851 Navy. But it doesn't look a lot like most Pietta 1851 Navies you're going to see. This one's been modified. I got this revolver when I was just shooting for the fun of it, way back when, almost a decade ago now. And back then wasn't making videos, just shooting a lot of black powder for the fun of it. And we got into 11 Bang Bang and started meeting more reenactors, and I had been part of Wild West shows at that point and pageantry shows that are not historically accurate. And I had carried it in that. I'd also carried Remingtons, I'd carried single action armies, open tops, for those kind of things. Those were basically horseback Wild West shows I was doing back in the day. And for that, a Pietta 51 Navy was perfect because you're a long ways away from the audience, and most people in those pageantry shows aren't historically accurate anyway. But as I got to know more people and got more in depth into living history, I realized the Pietta, although a great gun, is not the best revolver for living history. And one of the reasons is when they come, you buy a perfectly good Pietta from the store, blue barreled, color cased, hardened, all this stuff. It always has those, what I call the old chicken pox marks right here on the side, where all the Italian Piettas are marked with 36 caliber, black powder only, everything right on the side of the barrel. Uberti does a way better job with it of hiding it under the barrel. Now, this particular revolver, I hate to say it, but it was to me a better revolver than my Ubertis. And you guys have seen, if you've watched 11 Bang Bang, you know I've done literally every Colt cap and ball revolver, including the 1855 Root revolver and all that stuff. And I've got originals, Ubertis, Piettas, original copies from other companies that were made way back in the 19th century. And all of them, I've shot basically everything involved with Colt cap and ball revolvers these days, even some of the more very obscure originals. And the way it usually works out is, as far as mechanics and function go, even if they are 160 years old at this point or older, the originals are always better than the Italian replicas. Don't ask me why. I mean, obviously you can get a junker. They do not cap jam nearly as bad as the modern replicas because they're just finished out better, and they have heavier hammer springs than the modern replicas. Let's take a shot at that piece of bark out there at 10 yards. What do you say? That's why we don't do accuracy shooting on this channel. There we go. And the round balls are just punching holes directly through it, by the way. Let's aim a little higher, see if we can break it in two. Now, as you can see, we were chewing her up pretty good. We knocked it out there, there. And I know my first one I missed because I forgot that it shoots so high, and I aimed right up in here and I went right over the top. I'm aiming about 3 inches low with this revolver. Always have. It's been a while, like I said. So I shot a group here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and one over the top, 5. But that little group at 10 yards is within the size of my fist. That's something I've always been able to accept with a cap and ball revolver. By the way, one of those lead balls bounced off that tree behind it and actually landed right there. Interesting. Ow, that's still one. Interesting thing to look at right there. That's where it hit the target. And it kind of skidded off and landed right back there. We'll throw that right back in the pot and cast it again. The hammers are way too light in them, and I know why. Because people expect like a single action army or a cartridge gun when they pick these up, and they want to be able to do the fast little fan thing and this and that. So the very first thing they want to do is lighten that hammer, because that hammer is stiff. And pretty soon the companies just started making them lighter so that people would appreciate the gun. If you're actually taking it out and shooting it though, it's going to cause a lot of problems. Original Colt cap and ball revolvers have extremely heavy hammers. And what I've done with this one is to modify it to replicate that. Now, one thing a lot of times you will see, even on originals after they've been fired for 100 years, the springs are getting a little lighter, but they're still heavy. So I kind of replicated an original hammer spring in this, and it's actually a little heavier probably even than some of the originals. I know some people I've handed this gun to, they cannot even cock the hammer on it because I've got this thing so heavy. And the way I do that is I take 2 full-size springs and I put them in here together, and then it's very, very heavy on a 51 Navy. When you do that, you take the inside spring, the second one that you've just added, and you start trimming back on the end of it and shaving the sides till you get one that you can just pull back. You can pull it back quickly, and you can, it's not going to affect the way you're shooting, but it needs to have a lot of force on your thumb. And the reason is, when that gun goes off, you can see we've just fired it. That cap is still on that nipple. All right, right up here, you still see that chunk there? That is because there is no blowback on this hammer. This hammer is holding it in position. This gun didn't cap jam a lot to begin with because I had modified the hammer nose. Go check out videos by Duelist 1954, Mike Bellevue. Cap jamming almost went down to nothing. Dead tree stump. Give it one for I couldn't stand those markings that were all over the outside of this because I was taking this to reenact, and this was the gun I wanted to use because Piettas tend to mechanically, I was talking about earlier, the very best are originals. Mechanically, the second best are Piettas, and sadly, in my experience, this may be different for you, Ubertis, although they are prettier guns with the markings under the barrel, and a lot of times the wood's higher quality, they even cost a little more. The Uberti has not got nearly as hard internal parts. Maybe you're watching this video 10 years from now and it has changed, but as of this particular time, the Uberti, in my opinion, has parts that are way too soft inside and cause the guns to wear out very quickly. They're beautiful guns, but you can't just shoot them all day, every day without the hammers getting out of time, things kind of coming apart, and short arbor issues. There's a whole lot of issues with the Ubertis. So for an everyday shooter, I actually prefer the Pietta, but I couldn't stand those markings on the side. So this was originally a standard blue gun, and it was just like the others, black powder only. And so what I did was I took and lightly filed, I took all the finish off the gun, I lightly filed the markings off. You can still see them if you turn it in the sun just right, so nobody's ever going to think this is a fake. But I lightly filed those off, I polished it, and I nickel plated it about 2 years ago. And as you can see, the nickel plating is already wearing off the trigger guard, off the back strap, a few other places. I fire blued these screws, but it's been carried a lot in living history conditions, which means at one point this thing went through about 6 inches of rain in 3 days without really going inside. The second thing I did was I went to muzzleloaders.com and ordered a square back trigger guard for a Pietta 1851 Navy. There are several types of Navies, with the first one being completely different looking, and it was not called the 51 Navy. It came out in 1850. Colt wanted to call it the Ranger. They never called it the Ranger. It wound up being known as Colt's revolving belt pistol of 36 or naval caliber, right? Well, the first one, it had a completely different wedge system. The wedge went in upside down. The screws came in from the opposite side. It had a very narrow front latching piece, and that's just not what this gun was. It also had a squared back trigger guard, right? And there were a few other differences in frame and some other things. I couldn't go for that because the frame of this gun would not allow me to do the Type 1 because it's not designed to have the upside down wedge in the gun. And I wouldn't have wanted that anyway because it was not a very good design with the wedge system and didn't last very long at all. So I went with the Type 2. Now there's a few things here that are still not Type 2. I still have a wide hook up here. It would be much narrower for the first Type 2 that would have came out in 1851, 1852. And the screw comes into the wrong side. But I can live with that historically speaking because I don't have a particular incentive to push this back to 1850. 51, 52 is perfect for me. I did want the small squared back trigger guard from that Type 2 if I wanted to reproduce a gun that even from a distance as living history, even if the screw's coming through this from the wrong side, it looks like a gun that could be around in 1851. Possibly somebody changed the ramrod out or something, you know. And so I wanted to do that. I bought this square back trigger guard from muzzleloaders.com, and it was not a precise fit at all. First thing I had to do was trim the trigger down because as this was a gun that originally had an large oval trigger guard, trigger was too long, had to trim the trigger down. Second thing was when I got this from muzzleloaders.com, the grip itself, the trigger guard back here was just way too short. And I'll show you what I mean. It would not reach the bottom of the back strap. So what I wound up having to do was take my old trigger guard, cut the bottom of it off, and braze it onto the bottom of the back strap where it would come up and reach that trigger guard. And then I got a longer screw and retapped it so that it would all fit in there. And it has a little gap there, but that's basically what I had to do with the muzzleloader.com. I probably could have sent it back, but that's not the kind of thing I like to do. If at all possible, I like to modify it, make it work. And what I wound up with was a gun that I completely stripped, did a square back trigger guard job on, filed a lot of the markings off, but not all of them so that it's not so obvious. And then after I'd done all that, I nickel plated it. This was my very first nickel plate job on a cap and ball revolver, and it didn't come out exactly how I wanted. If you look right here, this was over 2 years ago. We're already starting to get chips coming out of it, and that is because I did it too thick. I've learned since then how to do it a little better. I got chips coming out of it, and it's wearing off the brass. But remember, my impression usually sets around 67, 68. By this point, this gun should be over 15 years old, even in the impression. So a little bit of chipping coming out of there actually fits. Little stick back there. One more. Knot hole on the second small log in the back. When I'm doing an 1867-68 impression, I wouldn't be doing that. I'd be loading paper cartridges because by that point, paper cartridges really would have been a thing. But remember, if we're setting this in 1851-52, paper cartridges aren't that big of a thing yet. The military's still even experimenting with them for like the Colt Dragoon. And so they're around, but the common person probably in 1851-52 will still be loading this gun with loose powder and ball. You'll notice I put that in there. I'm gonna ram it in with 27 grains of powder, and it cut a little ring. You can see right there. And I used to use fiber wads, but you'll notice I didn't put a lube fiber wad in there because I used to get chewed on a lot from reenactors, the internet. Why would you put that fiber wad in there that's not historically accurate? And they would tell me what is historically accurate is to load the round ball and then slather grease over it. I'm here to tell you, there are actually cases I have read of people putting pillow ticking patches that are wadded up under the ball that are lubed on top of the powder. So technically speaking, there is some, and it's probably not that common, but some references to people using some form of wad under the ball that's lubed. But a lot of times it's not historically accurate to rub grease over the top either. Now, it did happen. There are records of people, especially the Texas Rangers, rubbing a little grease on top of there to waterproof the charge. It was never necessarily for lubrication or anything like that. Colt himself said in the loading of every box that he sold with a Colt revolver to a civilian, it said right in the lid of the box, load the powder, and they didn't say the amount. They said load powder to the top of the chamber, put a ball in there with neither grease nor wad. That was always in parentheses right there. Press the ball down to where it will go past the forcing cone and you're ready to go. Now, here's the thing. You have to use a very oversized ball when you're doing it this way, or you're going to get chain fires. The military went on and early in the Civil War discovered, especially when they're using elongated conicals, that they were letting the barrels out. It doesn't happen very bad with round balls, but with conicals, where there's a lot more meat engaging the rifling, they were letting barrels out. And so lube really started with the paper cartridges being dipped in a wax, and then they would be shipped up, and when you loaded them, they were already pre-greased. The idea of everybody greasing over the top of the ball, it may have happened, but if you're in a warm climate and you're carrying this in a holster, it's literally just going to run out when it starts getting hot. I don't care unless it's like some really super hard straight beeswax or something. It's going to run all out down your holster as soon as things get warm, as soon as things get hot. So it did happen. I don't think it was nearly as common as people make it out to be. Early on in the production of this revolver, when most people that were civilians were still loading loose powder and ball, they didn't put anything on it. And then later on, by the time we start thinking that lubrication is good for not having any lead fouling, everybody's buying pre-lubricated paper cartridges anyway. And so the whole idea of smearing grease over there, if you do it, that's fine. And historically, yes, there is records of that being done, but it's not the end-all be-all most historically accurate way to do it. That is how a Colt cap and ball revolver should operate, guys. And as you notice there, I was not doing the whole shoot and then tip it up in the air and then shoot and tip it up in the air. Can be done. I'm sure somebody did it in history, and sometimes in the manuals and stuff you'll see point to a 45 degree, but I don't see any accounts of anybody using these actually in history where they're facing someone and they're going to shoot and then throw their gun up in the air like that so they don't cap jam and then come back down. You have proper hammer tension and your gun is polished up and the hammer face is polished up correctly, you won't have to face those cap jams like a lot of other people. Another thing you'll notice is here I'm not loading from a table or with a loading stand or anything. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way, but if you wanted to historically represent how this gun operated early before cartridges when you're using powder and ball, it's a good idea to practice, especially if you're going to go out in the woods and hunt with it a little bit. It's a good idea to practice loading with just your two hands and figuring out what method you have to get the gun to load exactly how you want to without dropping a bunch of stuff. Okay, we are loaded with all 6. Round ball, 27 grains of powder, no lube. This is about after this cylinder, we'll have close to 70 rounds to this gun over the course of 3 days, and we'll see how it's still moving. All right, moving targets, here we go. Tree limbs. Took 2 hits because I didn't set my caps. Let that be a lesson to you kids. fat burning hand. One other thing I want to point out for avoiding cap jams, get the caps that fit your gun. Maybe some guns like a CCI number 11 or CCI number 10. This gun has always liked the Remington number 10s. Sometimes they're hard to find, sometimes they're a little more pricey, but it's always the better option for this gun in particular. Well, thank you guys. That's all I have today on the Pietta 1851 Navy. Stay tuned. In a couple weeks, I'm going to spread this out a little bit because of the last video that I have plans for. I need it to be a little further into spring before I can make it. But this is the Pietta 51 Navy. Stay tuned for a Uberti 51 Navy coming in a couple weeks. Stay tuned for these to get a little bigger and a little bigger, and by the time we get to the third episode, we will combine them and we will do a history of the 51 Navy on the frontier. And so, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.